Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. All members of Congress are invited to President Biden's State of the Union address, but only if they adhere to very strict COVID rules. We'll explain why some members of the GOP might not be attending. And with the Canadian trucker protest being broken up by the authorities, a convoy in the U.S. is just starting to fire up their engines. We'll bring you the latest. U.S. troops are on standby in Poland, and President Biden again is calling for diplomacy from Vladimir Putin. We bring you the president's remarks, and we take a look at how this conflict is hitting close to home as gas prices continue to surge. At the White House today, President Biden spoke with NATO allies and gave updates about the anticipated Russian invasion into Ukraine. NTD's Melina Wisecup brings us those updates, along with a closer look at how this overseas conflict is impacting your price at home at the pump.
After a call with NATO allies, President Biden gave official updates on a Russian invasion, warning Putin has decided to invade.
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
An attack could involve jets, tanks, missiles, and cyber attacks. Today, detailed reports reveal that the number of troops along the border has nearly doubled in just 2 weeks' time, from 100,000 on January 30th to now 190,000. U.S. troops are now on standby in Europe.
Whenever we place an American soldier somewhere, it demonstrates our resolve.
Today, Russian-backed separatists called for an evacuation in eastern Ukraine, claiming Ukraine was going to attack. Western officials say this is just the latest false flag operation for Russia to justify an invasion. Yesterday, a kindergarten in Ukraine was struck by artillery shells, wounding civilians. And Ukraine's military says Russia-backed troops were behind the attack. Officials say avoiding a war appears dim, but Biden insists he's keeping the door open for diplomacy.
Until he does, diplomacy is always a possibility.
And this overseas conflict has already hit home here at the pump. You may have noticed that you're paying a bit more for gas, especially over this past month. That's because prices have gone up 30 cents per gallon.
Probably 85% of the recent run-up in the last 2 months we can attribute to the increased risk as a result of those tensions. And the worry is that Russia produces about 10% of global oil supply. If the U.S. responds to any incursion with sanctions, Russia could retaliate by limiting oil exports.
This is the 7th week in a row gas prices have climbed. One energy expert says we could see prices rise as high as $7 per gallon, but others have more modest predictions.
I would say $4 a gallon is likely at some point in March or April. Beyond that, if the worst case scenario happens, we could see a national average that approach $5. I don't think it would get there, but I don't think Americans can count on really any relief until later this year.
Melina, you mentioned that if the U.S. does sanction Russia in an effort to restore peace in Europe, we could see Russia retaliate by limiting oil exports, which could raise the gas prices even more. How likely is that, and how long can we expect to see those higher costs that we're seeing at the pump right now?
Well, as for the possibility that we could see Russia respond to sanctions in this way by withholding those oil exports, that's something that we could in fact see here, because Russia did already take this approach in Europe whenever they couldn't get their way on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They withheld those oil exports, causing Europe's energy prices to soar. And some are worried that this could happen here if we are forced to get to that point where we do have to impose those sanctions on Russia. Now, as for the prices that we're seeing right now, we could expect to see these elevated rates through the spring and through the summer. We should expect to pay around $4 per gallon, and experts say we shouldn't expect any relief at least until the end of the year. Now, the White House right now is brainstorming ways to help lower these costs, and some members in Congress have introduced a gas tax holiday that would lower the price of gas by about 18 cents per gallon. But so far, no solid action has been taken by Congress or the White House just yet. Steve, back to you.
Thanks for that, Melina. And all members of Congress are invited to attend President Biden's State of the Union address, but they must wear masks and test negative for COVID. Senator Marco Rubio posted on Twitter, "Below is the COVID theater rituals to attend the State of the Union. No thank you, maybe next time." Last month, House conservatives expressed, quote, disbelief and outrage when Speaker Pelosi provided them with masks made in China. Similarly, a White House initiative mailed out millions of COVID test kits, which were also made in China. As the Omicron variant subsides, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is letting her mask mandate expire on February 28th. However, the March 1st presidential address will still be requiring masks. A convoy led by truckers will kick off on February 23rd from California. They'll be making their way across country to the nation's capital. The convoy is a peaceful protest to end the federal government's COVID-19 emergency powers. About 500 to 1,000 truckers are expected to gather for the trip, with more expected to join in along the way. Organizers will release details of the routes 2 or 3 days in advance. Brian Brace, one of the organizers, has told the Epoch Times that routes will be selected as safety dictates, and they're expected to travel along Interstate 40 toward D.C. The organizers named the large convoy the People's Convoy. They say it will be nonpartisan and all are welcome to join. Democrats in Illinois voted to remove 9 Republicans from the State House for not wearing a mask in the chamber. The decision comes after Democratic Governor Pritzker and other Democratic governors have decided to lift their mask mandates. Here to discuss the ongoing mandates is one of the organizers of the convoy heading to D.C. to peacefully protest the mandates, President of Unity Project, Parissa Fishburne. Parissa Fishback, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Parissa, I want to ask you about the mask mandates. We're seeing many blue states starting to roll them back. You're in California. The science and studies are there that the cloth masks, which are mostly worn, do little to nothing to mitigate the spread. So what's the point and what gives?
If you're asking what gives with our governor here in California, your guess is as good as mine. As you stated, the science has been there since the very beginning. I think we saw Fauci in May of 2020 say on a national news syndicate that the masks do not work. Yet here we are nearly 2 years later, and we are still enforcing the use of them, especially on our children, which is highly egregious in my opinion. Not only have the masks proven to be ineffective, but they are also incredibly harmful, especially to children, physically, psychologically, mentally. So why our governor is doubling down when the rest of the world and the rest of the nation, including blue states, are starting to lift their mask mandates and their COVID mandates alike, I couldn't tell you. I don't want to know.
Fair enough. Now, in the capital, speaking of mandates, in the capital city of Canada, Ottawa, the Canadian government has just cracked down on a group of truckers that were protesting the mandates up there in front of their capital. Multiple people have been arrested. You are actually helping to organize a similar convoy in the U.S. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, the Unity Project is assisting the People's Convoy, peoplesconvoy.org, to initiate their convoy across America. We're going to start in California, and we're going to launch on February 20th. We'll be heading towards our nation's capital. As you know, the truckers are the backbone of any country, not just ours, but especially ours. Even with or without a pandemic or a state of emergency, we rely on them for our entire infrastructure. And so now they are going to be leading the charge to, hopefully regain our freedom in these states.
Now, from what I saw, the convoy is going to converge at the Capitol or in Washington, D.C. right around the time of the State of the Union, which is coming up. Congressional Democrats are placing very strict rules on that day, including forcing high-grade masks. They'll be removing people, senators and congressmen who do not comply. Senator Marco Rubio says he's taking a pass on the State of the Union this year. I know you've been working closely with some members of Congress, so do you think we'll see more of them joining Senator Rubio?
We hope so. We hope that this drive to not comply reaches everyone from, our highest political figures down to the layperson. At the end of the day, it's non-compliance that might be the winner in this game. But we appreciate Senator Rubio and senators like him that are showing their defiance. And what we really hope is that the senators come out and political figures that have their platform and talk about not only the fact that the masks are ineffective, but that they are harmful. And again, especially to our children, we need to educate people and let them know that this is something that goes well beyond just our fight for our freedoms. We're talking about true health and safety issues here with regard to not only the mask, but the vaccines as well.
Parissa Fishback, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Top national security officials are warning American companies of cyber threats, and the White House is publicly attributing last week's cyber attacks in Ukraine to Russia. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more.
We believe that the Russian government is responsible for wide-scale cyber attacks on Ukrainian banks this week.
The U.S. is blaming Russia for what Ukraine called the largest cyber attack it has ever seen.
We have technical information that links the Russian Main Intelligence Directorate, or GRU, as known GRU infrastructure was seen transmitting high volumes of communication to Ukraine-based IP addresses and domains.
Ukraine has accused Russia of targeting major banks and its defense ministry, which Kremlin denied. But both the US and UK on Friday named Russia the culprit, with the White House warning that this might not be the end of it.
Could look like in laying the groundwork for more disruptive cyber attacks accompanying a potential further invasion.
Another top official is also cautioning American companies to prepare for cyber threats.
Given the very high tensions that we are experiencing, companies of any size and of all sizes would be foolish not to be preparing right now as we speak to increase their defenses.
And as for what they need to do,
they need to be, as we say, shields up. And to be really on the most heightened level of alert that they can be and taking all necessary precautions.
Of the most sophisticated technology.
The White House on Friday added that Western allies are now converging on the final sanctions package against Russia. Reporting Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Enes Kanter Freedom, the outspoken NBA player, is facing a turning point in his career, but he says he has no regrets for speaking the truth. Caleb Max was at the award ceremony for Enes Freedom last night, and he's also running for Congress in Virginia's 10th district. We'll get his thoughts on the event and what he plans to do to hold China accountable. Republican Congressman Jim Hagedorn of Minnesota has passed away. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said in a statement, public service was in the congressman's DNA. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. NBA player Enes Kanter Freedom has been very outspoken on China's human rights abuses. He said the NBA has been trying to silence him for speaking against the Chinese Communist Party, but he has no regrets, even if it cost his career. In the past 2 days, Enes Kanter Freedom has received a warm welcome from Capitol Hill among senators. The support comes after the Houston Rockets released the center. Freedom has publicly condemned the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses, including organ harvesting. He says Chinese authorities and the NBA have been paying close attention to him and have also been trying to silence him.
2 years ago, when the Houston Rockets GM tweeted about, Hong Kong, NBA wanted to, silence everybody. I got a call from my agent and said the whole Chinese government are watching your Twitter. Do not say anything. And Celtics made me media unavailable for 2 weeks.
At an award ceremony in Washington, D.C. last night, Freedom talked about why he started to focus on China, and it all began at a basketball camp last summer in New York.
I remember one of the parents called me out in front of everybody and said, "How can you call yourself a human rights activist when your Muslim brothers and sisters are in concentration camps and getting tortured and raped every day?" I was shocked. I couldn't say anything. I turned around to that parent and I promised, said, "I'm going to get back to you." So that day I canceled everything. I went back to my hotel and started to study and started to learn about what's going on over there.
Freedom was traded from the Boston Celtics to the Houston Rockets last Thursday, but the Rockets released Freedom on that same day.
I talk about the issues that are happening in China. I lost my career. To be honest, it is a lonely road. I'm talking about in a sports world. You can talk about all the social justice, all the injustices that are happening around the world, but when it comes to China, you cannot speak up. If you do, then you have to face the consequences. But after learning all this, if I didn't speak up about all these issues that are happening over there, I wouldn't be able to go to sleep, But I have no regrets. I want to tell you guys that I have no regrets.
He says many of his NBA colleagues told him they couldn't publicly support him because they want the Chinese market.
But there are some important things than money and business, like morals, like principles, like values.
Freedom says he will continue to stand up for what he believes in, like his mother had taught him when he was a kid, even if it means sacrificing everything. He was recently nominated for the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. And Caleb Max is running for Congress in Virginia's 10th district. He was also at the award ceremony last night. We're happy to have him. Caleb Max, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, Caleb, you were at the Captive Nations award ceremony where Enes Kanter, along with two Chinese dissidents, were awarded a Freedom Award. Tennis star Peng Shuai and Zheng Jian, who was involved in being outspoken about the Wuhan virus in China. And obviously they weren't able to attend. But how important is it to magnify voices like these?
It's extremely important. What's happening in China and has happened to Peng Shuai and actually the hundreds and really thousands of prisoners of conscience that are currently being oppressed by the Chinese government and imprisoned. It's important. It's extremely important that we stand with them and advocate on their behalf. There have been so many champions in the U.S. Congress that have began to stand up from the government perspective to help these individuals. But politics is downstream of culture, and until the culture wakes up to the threat of China and what is happening to these individuals. And Peng Shuai is someone who's in the culture. She's a very famous tennis star. We need more people from the culture to stand up and advocate. And Enes Kanter was the first person to, with no reason to benefit himself, advocate for the persecuted in China. And he's doing fantastic work, and as evidenced by the great crowd that came out to see him from all the different communities last night.
Now, to your point, the NBA is a big part of American culture as an organization. I think we know why they're taking this silent stand that they are when it comes to China. It's obviously monetary. But where are the rest of the powerful voices in the business community calling on the NBA to do the right thing?
I mean, the NBA has actually set up different feeder schools in Xinjiang province in China where they actually recruit players and teach. I mean, the NBA also produces many of their jerseys and shoes there. Nike has factories there. Apple has factories there. Part of the reason that none of these corporations stand up about it is because all of them have a hand somewhat financially in the Uyghur genocide, in slave labor. And so for one of them to come out and admit that it's wrong, all of the rest would have to follow, especially in today's day and age where everyone wants to be make sure they're aware to injustice. Mostly they focus in the U.S. If one of them admits, if the NBA admits that they are helping fund a genocide in Xinjiang, then every other corporation would have to follow. But this is where you need one courageous business leader to actually stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. We're going to take our assets out of there. And I think the rest will have to follow.
Now, you mentioned just previously that there have been a lot of outspoken voices in the United States Congress when it comes to calling out China. Your grandfather, former Congressman Frank Wolf, was actually a pioneer, I think, when it came to calling out the CCP at a time when many in our government were just going along to get along. What have you learned from him? And if elected to Congress, how will you confront the China threat?
Yes, my grandfather was a pioneer when it came to defending the persecuted in China and waking up the United States government to the threat of China as a whole. In fact, in the late 90s, when he was in China, he went with a group of congressmen and met with the then President Li Ping, and who is, effectively the Xi Jinping of today. And he literally went into what was effectively their Oval Office, and he had a list of 12 prisoners of conscience that he wanted to get out of Chinese prison. And he stood up in the meeting and walked up to the desk that the premier was sitting at, and the security guards kind of got nervous, and he handed them a list of the names. He said, "You must release these people," and he would not take it. He didn't accept it. And if you think about that in today's terms, imagine a U.S. congressman going into Xi Jinping's office and demanding in front of him that he stand up and release prisoners of conscience around his country. It would never happen. And we need members of Congress with guts that aren't afraid to go to the highest levels of power and take on the Chinese head on and advocate to get these people out at all costs.
Caleb Max, candidate for the United States Congress in Virginia's 10th District. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Congressman Jim Hagedorn of Minnesota has died of kidney cancer. His wife announced his death this morning. He had served in Congress since 2019 and represented a district along the Minnesota-Iowa border. His wife said in an announcement that Jim loved our country and loved representing the people of southern Minnesota. Every moment of every day he lived his dream by serving others. Hagedorn was 59 years old. U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy says he and his whole family have tested positive for the CCP virus. His 4-year-old daughter was the first to test positive. Murthy says everyone is doing okay. The Surgeon General writes on Twitter that many people assume you must have been careless to get sick. Our safety measures reduce the risk, but they can't eliminate them. Nothing can. Both Murthy and his wife were both fully vaccinated. And a bipartisan group in the Senate is examining concerns of rampant corruption and abuse in federal prisons. The federal government currently operates 122 prisons across the country. They're facing charges of corruption and sexual assault. Lawmakers have formed the Senate Bipartisan Prison Policy Working Group to look into the charges. Senators Mike Braun and John Ossoff lead the group. Ossoff says America's prisons and jails are horrifically dysfunctional and too often places where brutality and criminality are prevalent. According to Ossoff, the Senate Working Group will identify and advance solutions. That's all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you Monday.